history tends to be mostly about politicians, the rich and the famous, and therefore little is preserved about the lives of ordinary black working people in Britain. Ziggi Alexander, one of the instigators of the exhibition, describes how it came about.
It was by accident, actually. Audrey and I were discussing repatriation, and I remembered that Elizabeth I had issued a proclamation for the blacks to be removed from the country. And we thought, well, how come she could be issuing such a proclamation when we had learnt that there were no black people in Britain at that time? So that started us off.
Is there any particular reason that you chose 1555 as your starting date?
Yes, although we located black people in Britain before that date, there was no sizable community until about that time.
Historically, the presence of black people in Britain has generally been associated with the slave trade. 400 years ago, the majority of black people living in Britain were slaves brought over by ship's captains and plantation owners. Apart from being a source of cheap labour, black servants became fashionable amongst the aristocracy as status symbols, and as such were much sought after. Due to the development of trade with India, a similar pattern emerged with Indian servants, though to a much lesser degree. British newspapers frequently advertised the sale of black slaves as though they were mere livestock. They also advertised rewards which were offered for the capture of runaway slaves. There were also legally free black people like Francis Barber, who on the death of his master was given his freedom as a reward for faithful service. He later became Dr. Johnson's servant and helped Boswell to write the life of Johnson. Olaudah Equiano was able to purchase his freedom, later campaigning for the abolition of slavery and for the promotion of equal rights for black people. Other black activists like him attended anti-slavery conventions. Slavery in this country was finally abolished in 1834. As many of the paintings and drawings in the exhibition show, black people lived throughout the whole of the British Isles and not just in the major cities and ports. They lived and worked alongside their poor white counterparts as domestic servants, street peddlers, entertainers, apprentices, and sometimes out of economic necessity as prostitutes and beggars. The king of the beggars was Billy Waters, who gained unexpected fame when he appeared in a book written by Pierce Egan. Ironically, people became less generous after it was published, and Billy ended his days in the poorhouse. There are many such stories showing the lives of town and country folk, leading eventually into the 20th century. Here, for instance, are a group of children on their way to Epsom races in the 1930s. How did you set about researching such a mammoth project?
It was difficult. We didn't know where to start to begin with. What we did was we went to all the museums and galleries in London and just went to the photographic departments and looked through absolutely everything to try and locate pictures with black people in them.
Is there any particular period that really stands out for you in this exhibition?
I think in terms of population figures, for example, in 1750, there was a population in London of about 750,000, and there were 20,000 of those were blacks. Now, proportionately, that's much more than there are today. So we were just interested in the size of the community and actually what happened to those people, because by the middle of the 19th century, primarily through intermarriage, the black community had all disappeared in real terms, and that was interesting.
Some may say that it's a rather academic exercise, but why do you consider it important for us to learn about the history of black and Asian people in this country?
I think it's important to realise that Britain has had a multiracial society for centuries, and that black people made a positive contribution to those societies in the past, particularly as we've had a lot of negative media input. Blacks are always associated with problems. So we felt it was important that we showed that in fact in the past that hadn't been so to such an extent as we're led to believe now.
The exhibition also reflects various black and Asian personalities in British history, some of them familiar names, others not so well known. Mary Seacole was the forgotten heroine of the Crimean War. Born in Jamaica, she came to Britain to offer her services as a nurse, but she was turned down. Undeterred, she went to the Crimea at her own expense and did much to help the wounded and dying on the battlefield. In the political arena, Jamaican-born Marcus Garvey was the founder of the UNIA, an international political organisation based in Britain, campaigning against colonialism. He was, and still is, a great source of inspiration to the black people of the world. In mainstream politics, 2 of London's 3 Indian MPs, Sir Manchji Bhanagri, elected in the 1890s, and Shapardji Seklatvala, elected in the 1920s. Included in the arts section, the man who was considered to be one of the finest Shakespearean actors of all time, Ira Aldridge. Also, Samuel Coleridge Taylor, the internationally acclaimed composer and conductor. Although his music is well known, few people realise its composer was black. I gather the exhibition's been very popular up and down the country. What sort of people visit it?
We've had very young children, in fact, a lot of older people who are interested in the war years, teachers, educationists in general, and the general public.
What's been the general reactions to it?
Very positive. Most people have been really surprised that in fact there were black people in Britain before the 1950s, and so the immediate response is one of surprise at the information.
Another section depicts life at sea, showing black involvement in Britain's trading and naval history. Britain's military history is also reflected in the exhibition through paintings and sketches dating from the 18th century onwards. These unique photographs illustrate black and Asian participation in both the First and Second World Wars. Nisa Khan was a member of the Special Operations Executive. Her distinguished career earned her the George Cross, the MBE, and the Croix de Guerre. She was shot by the Germans at Dachau. What are you hoping that the exhibition will achieve?
Well, I think to reverse that myth about multiracialism, because the debate keeps going on, and people still think of us as being new to Britain and not being a part of it. I think it's important that black people and white people realise that there is some continuity in our presence here, and that not all of it is negative, that we in fact could, as we have done in the past, make a positive contribution to British society.
Perhaps some of the most stirring photographs are those showing men and women from all over the British Empire who'd come to Britain to offer their services. They depict a period in history which is still fresh in many people's minds, the role of the Royal Air Force in the last World War.